first Tony Hawk, and then Call of Duty was the game. That's what's incredible. It's still the game. It's still awesome, 20 years later.
I actually like business. To me, like spending time thinking about the organizational structure and the organizational design and how you tie performance and reward, I love that stuff. The thing that actually transformed the video game business the most was PlayStation 1. Kids really couldn't detect 3 dimensions until they were about 14 or 15 years old. But over the decade that the PlayStation existed, kids had the ability spatially to perceive 3 dimensions at 9 and 10 years old because of video games. There's 200,000 able, capable, unemployed veterans in the US. You serve your country, you come out of active duty, you're 3 times less likely to find a job than an ordinary citizen. I'm spending most of my time on is finding jobs for veterans. I think we're probably close to 145,000 jobs.
Look, I appreciate you doing this. This is awesome. This is so fun, and having Bing is even more awesome. So thank you. Like, this is great.
Well, I don't know you, but just so you know, I'm only doing it for him.
Trust me, I know. I didn't think it was for me.
Wow.
Didn't the Vivendi CEO originally want to merge with Activision in order to become the CEO himself of the combined entity? Is that true?
Yeah. Well, so there was a CEO of Vivendi Games, and he wanted to be the CEO of the combined business. And I actually was okay with that. And then the CEO of the whole company had so much compensation envy because, French companies, they just don't pay. He actually thought, hey, I might be better off being the CEO of this company. I could make a lot more money than being the CEO of Vivendi. And so there were 2 guys who wanted it.
And they had 52% of the company?
51.
So then you can play them off against each other.
Well, this was it was not a good situation. I Bruce Hack, you never met him? He was a decent guy. And so we finally settled on all right, we'll be co-CEOs. And a week before the deal was going to close, the French guys came to me and they said, yeah, we thought about it. We don't like the co-CEO idea. And to tell you the truth, we weren't going to keep him anyway. So we just want you to be the CEO. Wow. And I was like, well, does he know that? And they said, no. And I said, I don't really like that. We agreed we were going to be co-CEOs. I don't think it's the right thing to do. And they said, well, that's our condition. We want one CEO and we don't want him there. And we had to wait till now because if the deal didn't go through, then, we would have not been able to replace him that quickly. And I said, well, how do I know you're not going to do that to me? And they said, you don't.
Yeah. Let me go to the bathroom and come back with a better answer.
So I said, well, you got to tell him. And they said, we'll tell him the day it closes. So I called them up and I said, I got to tell you something. I don't feel good about this, but they're not going to tell you, so I am. And I told him, and he's like, Bobby, I knew. He's like, I negotiated a great payout. And he's like, tell you the truth, I don't even think this co-CEO thing works. He's like, so I really appreciate you telling me this, but sort of in the cards for me. He's like, and I got, I'm older than you are. My wife's been working really hard for a really long time. She's a lawyer at Simpson. And he said, so we're good.
What year was this?
2008.
Yeah, I was.
And you were at Zynga at the time.
That was the year I left EA for.
Sorry,
Flying.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I did Zynga kind of.
And then did you guys know each other then?
We've known each other since 1983.
And were you frenemies?
No, he's the best guy. Our fear, I'm not saying because he's sitting here, our fear was always that Bing was going to run the company.
Did you guys ever try and work together?
Yeah, they tried to buy us a bunch of times. We had merger conversations a bunch of times.
We talked a lot. There was a period. There's probably so first of all, going back in history, So I realized in thinking about it, you have like a flawless M&A record. And it's most of the stuff that you acquired, including some properties, even the Call of Duty team early on, it was knowable before you did it. And part of flawless acquisition is being able to keep the value in the company after you acquire it.
It's a Berkshire principle.
It's kind of been amazing that you got, so starting with the original Activision, very distressed. Before Bobby came in to rescue it, the people in charge, a bunch of bozos, they renamed the company Mediagenic, worst company name in history. And I think that made this bundle of assets and this back catalog seem so unappealing. And, Bobby, who kind of I knew of as, this punk ass with aspirations, came in and put it together and thought, wow, that's so gutsy, because that thing is like a train wreck. And I think you had about a decade of EA envy, and we talk about it and be pissed off because we were trading at a 50% higher multiple than you were on basically the same business. And EA could get to market a little sooner on new platforms, and you flip that mostly through staying power and through, the judge of management is when you keep winning. And for the last 15 years, maybe even 20 years, Activision did this to EA, and EA looks like this tired company being led by, non-founder energy with kind of mediocre judgment. So while you were doing Blizzard that EA passed on, and you were doing King, EA did PopCap. EA did just stupid things in a row. And while you and Brian kept running stuff, EA turned to, somebody else that they should have known better. Brought in a CFO they should have known better. And it was kind of the no talent, no good acquisition. And, so first question is, what's your trick of always making good acquisition? The second is, it's a pain in the ass dealing with managers. It's a pain in the ass dealing with previous founders. It's a pain in the ass dealing with creative people. And you can see in the press, you had some pain in the ass moments about it, but you stayed pretty steady and the businesses kept being valuable.
We actually had a bad acquisition.
Which one?
We bought a company that was in Manchester that did the driving game for Xbox, and it was called, they had a good guy who was running the day-to-day, but he was like a brilliant guy who, like a McKinsey guy, and he was like in strat planning. He's like,
but that wasn't a bet the company acquisition.
It was $80 million, and like we wrote it off 2 years later. But it was, everything about it was like violated all our principles. We always.
That's like a really expensive MBA.
That guy was an expensive lesson. But we had the Berkshire Hathaway approach to acquisitions, which is we wanted companies with a history of profitability, either a proprietary technology or intellectual property right, a history of good management that we would keep, like not that we were looking to replace. We never changed the names or the culture. We just kept them as they were and tried to keep them very independent. And that was a different strategy than EA had.
Yeah.
EA, it's like if they bought a studio in Warsaw, Poland, it became EA Warsaw. Like, then you got a book. Bob Dewar gave me the book. I was like, this can't be real. It was like down to the cube, color, and chairs. You could only have what was in the book. So like EA's strategy was like to electronic artsify every single acquisition. Like Distinctive Sports was one of the great acquisitions they made, immediately became EA Vancouver. Ours is like, didn't matter what the studio's name was, like And we had some, we had a company called Neversoft, like there's probably a decade where you couldn't have a company called Neversoft.
Brag, brag, brag.
But we just let the founders keep doing what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And there were only a couple of times, like Vince and Jason, it's not like we didn't know they did it to you, so we figured at some point they're going to do it to us.
Right.
And but for the most part, that was like the difference was buy businesses that you like the founders and you like what they're doing, and you stay out of their way.
It made for happy customers because being a customer of some of those franchises, they didn't get the creative burnout that so often happens, where people, you got to change out the development team, change out the management team because they really don't want to keep doing it. And I was thinking about you and Brian. In the world of entertainment, there aren't very many duo leadership that stay together very often. In music, there's nobody stays together that long.
But Jimmy and Doug stayed together for a long time. And Bob and Terry stayed together for all the time that they ran Warner Brothers. But it's still kind of rare to have a business partnership that lasts 3 times longer than the average American wedding. Was he there before you got there, Brian? No,
How'd you meet him?
So I started a software company in my dorm room. And the only company that we talked to seriously about publishing the software we made, which was not game software, it was like application software, was EA. And it was when these guys started it. So, they had just gotten started in 82, 83.
Yeah, shipped in 82, founded in 82.
Yeah, so in 83, we
raised money a month before Atari announced they were about to die.
Yeah, and we came, I don't remember who introduced me to Trip, but so we came, and it was the only company we talked to about publishing our software, and it was software and a mouse, and they didn't really have, productivity wasn't like the thing they were thinking about, like word processors and things like that, but ours was it was like a Macintosh-like piece of software, but for the Apple II and the Commodore 64, because there wasn't a Macintosh yet. It came in 84. And my college roommate had seen a prototype of the Lisa. And he came back in France. He worked for this guy called Jean-Louis Gasset, who
remember him?
He's a great guy. And he saw this prototype of the Lisa, came back and said, we should make this Lisa-like software for the Apple II. And that was our first product. It was called Jane. And we went to Electronic Arts because their whole model was publishing other people's work. And we felt like, that's aligned with what we want to do. And then we started to negotiate and realized like these guys were tough negotiators. And so the first thing we did, we actually published on our own and realized publishing was pretty hard and we couldn't really get it quite right.
That's anti-scale.
Yeah, and we just didn't really know how to do that. And so we were more product people than publishing people. And so then the next wave of things we made were, I got really excited about the Amiga. Like I saw this prototype.
If that productivity software would have been a game, you probably would have been the EA CEO in 1991.
Probably not.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, but I don't think Larry would ever let me be that. But so then we started making software for the Amiga, and that we published with EA. So that was like that was probably 85.
86.
And, but it was hard, like you start out and you think, okay, these guys are your partner, but like they weren't really your partner. It was like they're the partner, but they get the big half. And so I started making a notebook of like things I didn't like about being in business with another company. And my notebook, I was looking for it before you came. I couldn't find it, but you know what my notebook was called? Schedule C. Do you remember what that was?
No.
Their contract had different schedules. Schedule C was computers that we were allowed to buy that they would advance us the money for, but they would own. And like we had this whole, like, it was like a limitation of like how many computers we could buy to do development. And it was, but they also had all these other like covenants and restrictions of like anything that they gave us, we had to give them money back for. And so my notebook was called Schedule C, of like everything not to do if you're going to be in a publishing relationship with this studio.
The cost of getting that expensive distribution was dear. It also reminds you that if you have control of distribution, you can get to be a little bit pushy.
Yeah, well, also you had capital too. It's like, and I have to say, like, there were good, like, like Stewart was great. It's like, there were not a lot of people like Stewart.
The game makers there love making the games.
And so they used to have these developer offsites.
Artist symposium.
Yeah, it wasn't like a fancy thing. It was like in Santa Clara at like the shitty hotel. And that too, by the way, the airfare, the meals, like went on the Schedule C. So it's like, it's flying there.
It's all advances against royalties.
So, but we would go and it would be like this organized thing during the day, and at night, everybody, all these game developers sitting around the bar complaining about Electronic Arts and like how much we hated having to be beholden to this publisher. And so like my head was always like, I just want to run my own thing, and I don't want to be beholden to anybody. But if
these guys are gonna hate someone, they might as well hate me.
Well, I first thought of it as more as like, we'll be the developer and the publisher.
Right.
And then, but we didn't own any intellectual property. And so I bought a little licensing company that did consumer licensing, and it was public. It was $7 million. And they own the rights to properties that you wouldn't even have been alive for, but like Charlie Chan, the Green Hornet, the Shadow, like these old comic book or animated film.
The Marvel
properties.
character universe without Marvel.
Without
How much
Marvel
was
or
it?
DC, $7 million. But I bought it in 1989. And in 1988, they signed a deal to be the licensing agent for Nintendo. So all licensed Mario products went through this company. Bed sheets, breakfast, like they were a licensing company, but they happened to own some of their own IP. And then they had a toy development studio. So it was like another version of what we did,
Right.
But like, I love the idea that we could take video game properties and license them out for consumer products, because like Disney did that and made a fortune doing it. And I thought that would be a good
Mattel did
capability
pretty well
for
off
us.
it too.
Yeah, and we thought like, that's a good capability. Plus, they were very tight with Nintendo. So we buy this company, and we would have monthly meetings with Nintendo. And the chairman of Nintendo was a guy named Howard Lincoln. And
It was Nintendo of America.
yeah, and so one meeting I was at with him, I said, I also own a software company, and I don't really want to just be your licensing agent. I want to make Nintendo video games. And he's like, that could be a conflict. You're our licensing agent, and I don't know if it'd be a great idea to have you as a licensee. And I said, well, I'd rather do that. And he said, do you know Mediagenic? And I'm like, no. And he's like, it used to be called Activision. I'm like, oh yeah, I know that company. And he's like, well, they're not in really good shape.
Wow, that's how you heard about it?
I mean, I knew,
But he put a bug in your ear.
Yeah, and he said, you should buy Mediagenic. And like,
Wow.
they're our number one licensee. And, so the guy who ran Mediagenic was a lawyer. And there was a big lawsuit in the video game industry because Philips of the Netherlands owned this patent that was like a graphic chip patent. And it actually was a patent about how you actually moved pixels around on the screen. Most people just did like a license, paid nothing. Activision decided they didn't want to pay. So they got in this lawsuit with Philips. And Nintendo was also...
Philips did a system called CDI.
It was before CDI. This was actually for Magnavox... Odyssey. Yeah. And so they lost this patent infringement judgment to Philips for like $10 million. And the market value of Mediagenic went from 20 million to 2 million. So there was a venture capital firm in the Valley called Sutter Hill Partners.
They're still around, and they've been getting big returns ever since.
And so this Sutter Hill Ventures had put up the original venture capital for Activision. And they owned a 25% stake through this company called Genstar Pacific. And so we bought out the 25% stake for $440,000. And so we became the biggest shareholder of Activision. And Activision then had bought a company called Infocom, which made text adventures, like these incredible, it's like how I originally got hooked on video games.
Me too, loved them.
And
Boss company out of MIT. They did Zork, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
And but when they bought that company, it came with $700,000 of debt. And so we bought the debt. So now we were the largest shareholder and the second largest creditor for $1 million. And that's how we took over the company.
That's crazy.
So the compound interest rate on $1 million to get to $69 billion.
Well, it was $80 billion. They just keeps taking out.
Oh yeah, I
the
wondered
cash.
about that too, and I looked at it. I always thought it was 78 or 80. Okay,
The Microsoft acquisition?
They took the cash out. And
from 1 to 69, 65% compounded over 23 years. So good going, Bobby.
thanks.
And
65 is a good year as a compound rate.
Yeah, I don't remember what the actual, because we actually gave the original, so it was bankruptcy too. That was the other thing. The company was insolvent. And Howard Lincoln's law school roommate was the bankruptcy judge.
Wow.
how are you
Howard
funding?
Lincoln was a lawyer who grew in power and ran Nintendo America. Nintendo, nobody in the U.S. believed in. They did a test launch only in New York, only with Toys R Us in Christmas '86. In '87, they were an overnight success. And so by '88, every teenage boy in America,
35 million 8-bit NES systems had been sold by the end of '88.
Wow.
it happened overnight.
Yeah.
And people still didn't believe that video games were a thing at that point?
Then they did.
Then they
Then they did.
But Atari's collapse, people thought, yeah,
This
this
is it.
thing's a fad. It's pet rock. You know?
How are you funding the acquisitions that you were doing?
later on or the first one?
The first ones?
We were making money. I had a development company. We made money.
Well,
And then,
can you tell the Steve Wynn story?
yeah, so in 1983, in June, my dad was a lawyer in New York, and he had arranged for some friends of his who were investors, not really tech venture capitalists, but investors, to invest in our company. And I was at a party in Dallas, and with this girl who I knew, and I sit down at this table, and there's this couple sitting next to me, and I start talking to them, and they were like 40 and having this conversation.
Ancient.
And I said, I was 19, and I said, yeah, I started a company in my dorm room, and we're talking. And then the next morning, I see them at breakfast at the hotel, and the guy said, you going back to Ann Arbor? And I said, no, I'm actually flying to New York. And he said, we're going to New York. Why don't you come with us? And I was like,
You think this guy's pretty charming? He's not being charming yet.
I said, well, what do you mean, come with you? He's like, we just got a new plane, come with us. And I said, well, like, how does that work? I just go with you to the airport? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And he had a MD-80, like a DC-9, you know, like people had Learjets in the 80s.
Yeah.
This guy had an airliner. And I'm not kidding. It was like an airliner, you know, like a 200 passenger plane converted into a big living room. So I'm like,
Who is this guy?
this? And like, I'd never been.
You didn't know who he was really.
I had no idea. Like, I'd never been to Las Vegas, never been to Atlantic City. I grew up in Roslyn, Long Island, you know, like I didn't know about this stuff. And so I get on the plane and I asked him how he got started. And it was an unbelievable, this is where I was like, oh shit, this is like the most charming guy I ever met in my life. And he's like, you know, I was 21 years old and my dad died and I was just going to Georgetown Law School. I just graduated from University of Pennsylvania and my inheritance was $30,000 that was owed to my dad by the Silver Slipper Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. And he ran bingo parlors. So I go out to Las Vegas and I get my $30,000 and he says, and I love this place. So I put the money up with a bunch of guys and I got a 1.5% interest in the Frontier Hotel. And 18 months later, it was bankrupt. And I had a wife and a kid on the way and lost my whole inheritance and didn't know what I was going to do. And 2 o'clock in the morning, some guy calls and wants to know who's in charge. And they offered to buy the company, which saved us from bankruptcy. And it was Howard Hughes. And he's like telling the story. I'm like,
Howard Hughes.
Holy shit. Like, this is incredible. And he goes, yeah, and I met this guy named Parry Thomas, who was Howard Hughes' banker. And he said, you're a smart young guy and I'm going to help you out. You got to promise me that someday you're going to help a young guy out like I'm doing for you. And he said, yeah, I promise. And so he's telling me the story and goes through the whole how he like got to where he was, which is opening the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City.
This is Steve Wynn.
Steve Wynn.
Yeah.
This is Steve Wynn we're talking
That's the
about.
punchline.
This is Steve Wynn we're talking about. And he funded you?
It was my first investor. But this is the good story.
Yeah, it goes on.
I said, yeah, that's an amazing story. He goes, and I gotta make it back. I gotta make it up to Parry Thomas. So maybe I can invest in your company. And I said, well, I have investors. In fact, that's why I'm going to New York. I'm seeing the investors on Monday. And he said, well, if it doesn't work out, or if you want other investors, I'd love to invest. And I said, thanks. I said, hey, you got a hotel in Las Vegas, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, there's this thing called a Comdex. He goes, yeah, I know what it is. And I said, you think I could get some hotel rooms from you for that Comdex? And he thought this is the funniest thing. He's like offering to invest, like he didn't know how much money, and I'm asking for a hotel room. So I go to New York and I go to the meeting with my dad and the investors. And it was just something, I just didn't feel like it was the right thing. So I blew the deal. My dad was really pissed. I called Steve Wynn and I said,
you're an idiot.
He's like, are you fucking kidding me? These guys are giving you $5 million and like, you're 19 years old. You don't even know how to make software. And
you're an art guy. And
yeah, I was a history of art major. And
yeah, it's probably already irritated him.
So, my dad liked art. But he said, I called Steve and I said, I blew the deal with these investors. He said, yeah, I knew you would. And I said, but I'm with my business partner and I need the money like right away. And so could we come see you? And he goes, yeah, where are you? And I told him. And he said, oh, it's close. He said, my office is a few blocks away. Just go to my office and they'll bring you to me. I said, okay. So I go to his office and there's it's like the biggest limo I've ever seen in my life. And these two like gorillas get out of the limo and they go, get in.
Mr. Kotick.
No, it's just like, get in. And we're like, where are we going? And they said, we're going to take you to Mr. Wynn. And they drive us to the 61st Street heliport. My college roommate was French. And he's like, what's going on? I said, I met this guy. I told you about him. And we get to the 61st Street heliport and the Golden Nugget, big Sikorsky is waiting. And they go, get in. I've never been in a helicopter. I'm all excited. Like, this is freaking cool. And we get in the helicopter. We fly to Atlantic City. And then there's another limo that takes us to his office, which is like in the parking garage, like downstairs below grade in the parking garage of the Golden Nugget, Atlantic City. And we wait like, I don't know, 3 hours. And he comes out, and like the guy was like movie star, good looking in those days, fancy suit, comes in, he goes, "Hey fellas." He goes, "Okay, what do we do again?" I said, "Well, we make computers easier to use." He goes, "How much for a prototype?" And I said, like $300,000 to make the prototype. He goes, "Okay." And he takes out his checkbook. He writes a check for $300,000. He goes, "All right, we're partners now. I raise the money, you guys do all the work." He goes, "Who's hungry?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Who's hungry? I'm starving. You want to go eat?" I said, "Yeah, but, should we talk about the details?" He's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, we have, contracts drawn up that we were going to use for the other investors." He goes, "Contracts, schmontracts. They're my family now." He goes, "I'll meet you in an hour at the steakhouse. Joyce, my assistant, will take you there. Clean yourselves up. We'll see you in an hour." Walks out. I'm sitting in the basement of a parking garage in Atlantic City with my friend.
With a check for
$300,000. And I look at my college roommate and I said, "All right, we're in the basement of a parking garage in Atlantic City. This guy just gave us $300,000 and said we're his family now. We're going to die."
Seen that movie.
And then we go to dinner and he introduces us to his daughters. And like all of a sudden we're like, oh shit, he doesn't care about our business. He thinks we're like son-in-laws or something. Like he doesn't know anything about software. And
doesn't want to learn either.
And so that was like the first $300,000. And then the only other check he ever had to write was we were refinancing the Activision business, and he put up another $1.5 million. But his stake would have been worth $25 billion.
Did he sell it?
So here's
another great story.
Did he sell it? Wait, I got to know. Did he sell it?
So here's the story that I heard, because I run into him at a Sun Valley cocktail party, and I said, I was talking to Bobby. He told me this story about how you became an investor. He says, "Well, there's more to it than that." He says, "Bobby called me up and says, 'Steve, did you see the news about the company?' And Steve goes, 'What company?' He goes, 'Well, my company, the Activision. It's your company.' He goes, 'What do you mean my company?' He says, 'You're a shareholder.' He says, 'I don't buy public company shares. I didn't invest in your company. I didn't do shares. What is all this?' He says, 'No. Remember that loan you gave me?' No. You gave me a loan when we got started, and I turned it into shares.' I said, 'What do you mean you turned it into shares?' 'I sent you some paperwork, you signed it, and you converted the loan into shares.' He goes, 'I have shares? Where are they?' And he says, Bobby told me, 'It's in my safe.' And he goes, 'In my safe? What are you doing there?' He said, 'Yeah, I'm keeping them for you.' He says, 'Well, when do I get them?' 'Well, I can send them you right away.' 'How much are they worth?' And Steve looks at me and goes, I'm thinking, maybe nothing, but how much is it worth? Bobby goes, $35 million. And Steve turns to me and says, I sold it the next day. And you know what I did? My wife had just divorced me and taken our Lake Tahoe house. And I bought a bigger house with $35 million the next week. And he said, I love Bobby. He didn't have to let me know that those shares even existed. And I didn't know anything about it. He says, what a guy.
They would have been worth $25 billion?
Yeah, it's so funny that he doesn't actually have the actual recollection of what happened, because that's largely like the story he tells. Here's actually what happened, which is a much better story.
Well, so I at least got corroborated from him that this is not a made-up Steve Wynn story. It might not be as exaggerated as it could have been.
No, but it's actually, I'm surprised. I guess he probably either didn't remember or doesn't want to quite tell this part of the story. So first part, you're right. I called him and I said, "You're public now. Stock, I think, was actually worth closer to $40 million." I said, "Yeah, we have a $350 million market value and you own 18% of the company." And I said, we're going to have an annual meeting. We're going to do it at the Century Plaza Hotel in LA. We're going to have shareholders over, and it'd be good if you came. You're our largest individual shareholder. I think it'd be good for the company. And he goes, "You got a $380 million market value?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "What kind of revenues?" I said, $60 million. He goes, "How do you have a $380 million market value?" I said, "It's crazy, isn't it?" He said, I think we had a $200 million market value when we had $500 million of revenues. He's like, you have a $380 million market value? I'm like, yeah. I said, will you come? It's in a few weeks, and it'd be great if you came. And he said, yeah, I'll come. So he comes, and it was 1994. And he had one of those mobile phones like this big. And he's standing there, and he's watching, and we do the presentation. We're like, yep, $380 million in 4 years. And, here's what our plan's going to be for the next 3. And I walked to the back of the room at the end of the meeting, and he goes, how's this thing worth $380 million? And I said, I know, it's crazy. It's like, we only made $2 million of profit. Like, there's no rational basis for it to be worth this much. He goes, it's really worth $380 million? He calls Tom Weisel. You know who Tom Weisel was?
Yeah.
Tom Weisel
Montgomery Securities at the
started
time.
Montgomery Securities.
He funded Lance Armstrong forever.
So he
Now
calls.
it's Stifle.
He goes, Tommy, it's Steve. He goes, remember those kids I told you about? And I knew Tom Weisel. He goes, Bobby Kotick. He goes, Activision. He goes, yeah. He goes, you know how much the company's worth? And he goes, like on his Quotron, he goes, almost $400 million. He goes, how's it worth almost $400 million? Tommy goes, I don't know, Steve, but that's what it's worth, he said. And Steve goes, well, I got the shares. He goes, how many shares do I have? And I told him, he goes, hey, Tommy, sell half the shares and put the rest in the trust for my kids. At my annual meeting, he sold 10% of the company. So 2 days later, of course, he has to file, and the stock goes down by 30% because Steve Wynn sold half his stock. And then probably 9 months later, because the stock went down to 12, he sold the rest of it. But I think he ended up making
He had one of those
$60
about
million.
that same year. A stock went from 41 to 11 in a week at the launch of 3DO.
Yeah.
What an insane story. Bobby, were you
But
worried?
it's also it's the resilience, but it's also the charm. 19-year-old guy running into Steve Wynn who goes, I made a promise to a guy, and you're the one I'm gonna land on. And I love the surprise return to the original benefactor, that kind of thing. And he still, when he talks about it, he embroiders it, I guess, but he still expresses surprise and joy that this kid surprised him when he didn't have to. That's pretty cool.
So the company's at 400 market cap. He sells.
Stock goes down.
Stock goes down. Then at some point, you keep chipping away at it. Vivendi merger happens.
Well, that's much later. So
Yeah, you had a hard kind of coal mine and pick for about a decade, and then started making good move after good.
Did you
move.
have any hits at that point before Vivendi?
every year we always had something good. And
But when was Tony Hawk? Tony Hawk and
Tony
Guitar
Hawk
Hero.
was-
Those are
Tony Hawk was before Vivendi?
yeah, Tony Hawk.
Tony Hawk
Those
was
are-
my
that-
era.
that-
Tony Hawk was one of the first video games
that was
I
like the
ever
end of the
played.
90s.
Yeah,
That
late
was-
90s.
That was huge.
Tony Hawk's a great story. My brother-in-law was an agent at William Morris, a big movie agent. And there was a family that we shared a ski house with. And the kid became worked in the mailroom, was a junior agent. And his first client was Tony Hawk.
Wow.
And we were thinking about doing a skateboarding game. And the guy calls me and he's like, you know who Tony Hawk is? I'm like, no. He said, you don't? I said, no. He said, he's a skateboarder. He's a world famous skateboarder. He said,
He's the action hero for teenagers.
so he said, you should meet him. So I meet him and I really liked him. And I was like, hey, I think we're going to think about making a skateboarding game, and, you want to do it with us? And he's like, yeah. And so we gave Tony $300,000, which was life-changing
It was
for him.
found money for him at the time.
I think he had just gone through the second divorce, and he was living in his car. And a few kids, and desperate for the money, and so we signed him up. And
how much was the royalty rate for him? 5-ish, less?
Like 1.5%.
Wow.
And we renegotiated over time. But so we made Pro Skater, did well, but Pro Skater 2 was an awesome game. And that was like the explosion of the business in some ways. And we also started buying up distributors in every territory. And that was a big thing because we realized, you know what, if you love the business, if you're 5% market share, 3% market share, why not participate in everybody's upside and own distribution in every territory? And that was a Morgado, like this guy from Time Warner who came on our board. Warner Music did this. They went and they bought the record distributors in every country in the world, and that's how they expanded their distribution. But then it enabled them to sign all the artists because they had this big distribution.
They could do a better deal.
Everywhere.
Better guarantees, at least.
So we just started buying up the distributors, and that grew our revenues. And then 2000 hit, and all the market values crashed, and the company's market cap dropped to like $150 million. We bought a bunch of stock back, but we were in a tough situation for that moment because market values crashed.
That was kind of grit moment number 3.
And I think that was the first time we talked to EA about doing a deal. And we could never get it. It's like we'd have these conversations and never amount to much. And then we started like getting aggressive about really blowing out the franchises, pruning like the number of things that we actually would make, applying much more rigid principles to what we actually would make, like had to be globally appealing, had to be clear sequel potential, had to be the number 1 or the number 2 in the genre. We had to, the tech team had to be the best tech team for that genre and game design talent for that genre, or we wouldn't make it.
Had you released Rock Band or Call of Duty at this point yet?
Guitar Hero came after Tony Hawk.
No, Guitar Hero was after that.
After?
Yeah. Guitar Hero was like 2004.
Did you worry after Tony Hawk? Like, did the shadow of the success loom over you of like, man, can we do this?
Oh, yeah.
Can we do this again?
Oh, yeah.
Every year.
Oh, yeah.
Every
Because then the expectation would raise
thing,
to what it now became from this last hit, right?
The first thing you do is you release another version and hope it sells better.
It's like a sequel of a movie.
You're always afraid that the bucket is going to be empty the next time you go to the well.
Like the reason why we were so covetous of Electronic Arts is like, we always thought like, what do they have to change? The team rosters, coaches,
FIFA 16, FIFA 17.
We got to change the whole game. It's like, we always kept looking. It's like, yeah, it's actually worth the royalty rate not to have to reinvent yourself in the same way that we did. It's like, and they could count on 32 really greedy owners who are going to make sure the thing was going to be broadcast everywhere. And, so like, we actually thought their business in a lot of ways was better than ours and more stable.
But the Blizzard business is even better.
And you bought Blizzard through Vivendi.
So we merged. We tried to buy Blizzard just on its own, and they wouldn't sell. And then
there was a time when they had an asking price of $800 million.
And they would have taken 500.
Well, Larry wouldn't meet with them.
I know.
That's right, as I say, both Call of Duty and Guitar Hero and Blizzard, EA saw all of those first and passed on all of them. This is why I have double high respect for you saying, no, this is, once jilted, I can get a better deal, but this is going to be good to own. And then you kept the people around. And I'm pretty sure that some of those companies, the creative leaders would not have stuck around in another company. So you did some kind of a miracle of keeping them productive for long periods of time and probably biting your tongue from time to time.
Yeah, Blizzard was the one I have to say, if I had any regret. And it was, I think what happened with Blizzard, so those guys, I knew them since 1990, and we had them doing conversion development for us. Like they did Shanghai for Windows 95. And, but they sold the company for $7 million to Davidson Software, which was an educational software company. And I was friends with the Davidsons, because there are not a lot of people in LA who were in the software business. And this woman, Jan Davidson, was a teacher. Her husband was like in the construction business, and he was a sophisticated guy. And they had this company making educational software, and they bought Blizzard for $7 million.
I didn't know that one.
And I was going to have dinner with Jan and Bob, and I get in the car, like in the minivan, and we go to the Chinese restaurant in Torrance, and they said, yeah, we bought Blizzard today. And I'm like, how much you pay? Bob said $7 million. I'm like, $7 million? Are you crazy? Like, our whole company's only worth $35 million. And like, we have a real company. Like, $7 million, that's outrageous.
Dev shop.
And so then, but the thing that you realize is like, and it was mainly Morheim, he always had seller remorse. He sold the company for $7 million, and then it got sold 5 different times. It got sent, Davidson got sold to Sendant, and then Sendant sold it to Universal, and Universal sold it to Havas, and Havas sold it to Vivendi. And like all this time, it's like the company keeps getting sold and people are making money, except the guys who founded the company. And one of them was just really passionate about making stuff. One of them,
Morheim or Adam?
It was Alan. Well, no, it was Alan. And this guy, Alan Adam, loved to make stuff. And he's the entrepreneur. Alan really was the founder of Blizzard. He brought those guys in afterwards. He wasn't at the company when we bought it, but we brought him back.
I didn't know that. Wow.
And so Mike just had seller's remorse, and he always was like bitter. And so it was really hard to like motivate him. And, there was always this tension with him. With Alan, though, it was the opposite. It's like the guy was a great entrepreneur.
Let me make cool stuff.
And so I brought him back.
Give me fair comp and let me make cool stuff.
And he felt like he got disadvantaged on the compensation front, because when we did the Vivendi deal, Morheim made like $150 million and Alan made nothing. And so I convinced Mike to bring Alan back. And I kept telling him, I'm like, it's like Steve Jobs going back to Apple. Like, you're the founder, come on back. And he was incubating a lot of really, really good things. And I was surprised. Microsoft shut them all down.
Really?
But there was one that...
What do you regret about that?
Well, just to go before you get to
part?
that. So a thing about Blizzard that I've noticed: nobody who left Blizzard has ever done great. So there's some secret sauce there with Alan Adam, maybe with Morheim, certainly in the
It wasn't Morheim. It was Chris Metzen, who was the other person I brought back.
Because it is amazing. It just shows sometimes leadership alone with replaceable parts is irreplaceable.
Yeah, but look, when we bought Vivendi Games, you can't imagine what these guys were doing. They had 25 different development projects that were not the Blizzard franchises. They had a social media division. They had a mobile gaming business. They had there were thousands and thousands of people. The whole company wasn't making any money. Only Blizzard was, and actually only World of Warcraft was making any money. Nothing else was making money. And so, we traded control of the company, and my view is like, World of Warcraft was going to continue, but we had to figure out how to make it less taxing and demanding on your time, because you couldn't be competitive and enjoy it if you didn't spend 4 hours a day playing it. And people would age out. Like, you have kids, you just couldn't play it. But you'd be shocked. 150 million people churned out of World of Warcraft.
Wow. over history?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a crazy number. Those are people paying $15 a month. Like, it was the best subscription business of all time. And so...
Except it could have been priced more highly.
We never raised the price.
I know.
My view was, like, come up with value-added services, come up with new things to sell, but, like, just leave the price. Like,
Oh, that's interesting.
we could figure out how to come up with other things to sell them. And there's a prickly audience, like, you don't want to, like, do too much to agitate them. And, like, even $1 increase would have been a problem in my view.
So the master of the prickly audience. Good going, Bobby.
Was Call of Duty already? Did it exist when you bought?
It's called Medal of Honor.
Well, Medal of Honor was at EA. The story is Medal of Honor had an owner in like Oklahoma and a development team there who felt unappreciated. They came to EA and said, well, can we do a deal with you? And EA said, no, we're sticking with the old guy who owns it. And they went to Bobby. Bobby said, well, here's the talent. So once again, so Medal of Honor died soon after. Medal of Honor was a Steven Spielberg invention. And Call of Duty went from being the little brother to being the monster.
But the thing about it, like...
Medal of Honor's biggest year probably did 150 million. And I think Call of Duty is like 2.5 billion a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, that's not little brother to big brother. That's rodent to T-Rex.
But it's a great story. So I had a board member who was Spielberg's lawyer. And he calls me and he said, Steven wants to make video games. He loves video games, he wants to make video games, and we're going to come to you first. And the only time I'd really pitched anything gaming related to Steven was I really wanted the rights to Jurassic Park. I was friends with Michael Crichton, and I had read the manuscript, and I thought, it's going to make a great game. And I called Michael, and I said, what do I need to do to get the game rights to this? And he said, you got to get them from Spielberg. He owns the rights.
Yeah. He started DreamWorks Interactive with Glenn Entist and made a terrible product, and that's how EA got involved there.
Well, no, it got licensed to Konami.
Oh, it did?
Yeah. So, but I had them make a manuscript. Like, our proposal was a manuscript of like what we were going to make. And I put it in like a dinosaur egg and in a crate. And like, I went nuts. Like, all I wanted
was the manuscript in a dinosaur egg in a crate.
As a
we
pitch.
delivered
to Spielberg.
Delivered to Steven. And I had every one of my friends who was good friends with him. I knew him, but I had all my friends who were good friends with him call him and say, like, Bobby really wants to do this. And I called him up and I said, what do you think? And he's like, it's like great pitch. He's like, great vision for what you want to do with the game. I said, I want to do it. And he said, I really would like you to do it. He goes, so pay the most money. And Konami ended up giving him some crazy guarantee, and we didn't get the rights. And I was bummed too, because I thought it would have made an incredible game. And
because it was low quality when it was done. It was a demo that never turned into good. It had full screen dinosaurs, and it was kind of fun, but it was one of those, it shipped when it was half done.
Yeah, and movies are always problematic because you never got the scripts. They changed the script. They wanted to keep control, like not let you know. They want to let it, risk of the storyline coming out. And so it's very hard to make a movie into a great video game and vice versa. But, being here, we thought like, well, there's things that we could license. Like we did Spider-Man, and that was a big success on PlayStation. But it was like the exception. And we realized we have so much IP in our library. Why would we ever make licensed games? We own Zork.
Yeah, you give 10 to 15%
Pitfall,
away to
River.
somebody just to inspire your development team.
Yeah, and even Pixar. Like I loved being in business with Pixar because I loved the culture of the company, but could never make money.
What's incredible is when I was growing up, it was first Tony Hawk and then Call of Duty was the game.
Still is.
And that's what's incredible. It's still the game. My buddies still play Call of Duty. I went over to their house 2 weeks ago and they're playing the new Call of Duty. And I get on there and I'm like, this is awesome still. It's still awesome. 20 years later.
And who would you credit for keeping the creative renewed in a franchise like that year after year? It's not always the same people.
I would say it is actually.
With Blizzard, it was the same people for a long time, with game designers changing, but the leadership the same.
In Blizzard, it was funny because Chris Metzen was like, and is like to me, the heart and soul of creativity of the company. And he left. He got burnt. You know what happened? They made World of Warcraft the movie, which I thought was a terrible idea. They had signed the deal before we had owned the company. And it took a lot of resources and distracted them. And, you know, like you think about all these people who make video games for a living and now they have the chance to like make a movie. And they're like helping with the casting and they're on the set. And it's just a huge distraction. And like our expansions were late, you know, patches weren't getting done on time. And it's just, and the movie was, it was one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
They were trying to become Chris Roberts.
And, you know, but Metzen, I think he took it very personally and he just didn't want to work. So he left, started a board game company. And a few years ago, I begged him. The guy who was running World of Warcraft, who's not there anymore, he called Chris and said, you know, would you ever consider coming back and consulting? And then he called me. He's like, I don't know any of the people at the company anymore. You're the only guy I know. Like, is this a good idea or not? And I'm like, dude, we got to have you back.
It's a good idea.
Please come back. And he calls me. He had seen like the 2 expansion plans. And he called me. He's like, they're not good, man. They need to be redone. And I'm like, just come do it. Like, you're the guy. Come do it. And he was the heart and soul of the company in every way.
When he came back, how often would you talk to him?
Hardly ever.
You set up the context and the architecture and let him do his thing. He
Like,
became.
What am I going to tell Chris Metzen about game design? You know,
Hope you're having a good day.
I just wanted him to do his thing. And he, you know, the last expansion, he had his fingerprints all over it. It's excellent. The next one is going to be great. Overwatch, you know, like we never got involved in any of the game making decisions, but they had this big project they spent like $80 million on. It was called Titan. It was this big, ambitious, like how to replace World of Warcraft. Instead of how do you figure out how to make World of Warcraft better, you know, and how do you deliver content to the players quicker? You know, still good content, but you don't need 3 years to make an expansion pack. You know, it's like figure out how to satisfy your existing player base instead of letting them churn. And so they realized that Titan wasn't going to be a game. And Mike canceled it. And Chris and Jeff Kaplan and a few other guys went to him and said, we have an idea that's like from the ashes of Titan. And we'd really like to make it. And Mike, to his credit, said, I'll give you 2 years. You know, it's like we have the engine tech.
That was Overwatch?
And it was Overwatch. And then they came to our like 3-year planning meeting and all I saw was the artwork. Like I didn't even see the prototype of the game. I just saw the game characters and I was like...
It is the game of all time with the characters people most wanted to own.
To me, I was like, I can't even believe this came from Blizzard because the Blizzard aesthetic was something dark and very different. And this was like the most hopeful, colorful, like Pixar-like universe. And I was like, this is unbelievable. Wow. We're making this. And like, I didn't even get to play the prototype of the game. And I was just like, we're doing that. And, you know.
Would they have done it without you?
They couldn't have because I had to sign off on the budget.
On it. Bobby, I read, and tell me if you think this is right or wrong, because everything you read is obviously true these days. So in this article, it said, Fortune was saying that in 2017 in June, you had become the longest serving head of any publicly traded tech company, which is incredible, if true. And then it went on to say,
I would have been like 26 years, so that's a long time.
2017. Well, yeah, it's probably true.
which is insane. But this is the part that I wanted to verify with
I was thinking
you.
about Larry Ellison, but then I realized he stepped down as CEO and Safra was CEO.
Exactly. It's a pretty fun fact. It said, not most technology-driven executives still prefers BlackBerry, something like that. Doesn't get in the weeds of creative storytelling, leaves that to the studios that Activision has acquired. But like David Geffen, who has never played a musical instrument, he signed Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, and the Eagles. Mr. Kotick is similar in the gaming industry. Do you think that's a fair characterization? I think it's flattering in some sense, but I also think it's maybe a backhanded compliment.
I mean, yeah.
He's old, but he knows talent.
Well, here's what I would say is the difference, though. David, when he sold the company, when he sold Geffen Records, it was a $200 million revenues company. He was never really interested in building an institutional quality company. His wealth has all come from really good investments. And the thing I would say about David that is, he's an unusual human being, and I don't really know anyone quite like this. He knows how to pick talent in every discipline. Like, you look and give him credit for just music. My best friend growing up was this guy named Eddie Lampert. And Eddie was working for a guy named Richard Rainwater. And when he was 26 years old, David said, come out of Richard Rainwater's firm. I'll give you $200 million. You invest my money. He found like the head of UCLA Hospital. Like the guy discovered, like Mark Grochan, the artist, was David Geffen's psychiatrist's son. The guy knows he has a talent to pick talent in every discipline. He can't read financial statements, but like he knows what stocks to buy. It's like all intuitive. And he's an exceptional guy. So like anytime I'll be compared to David that way, I'll take the credit. But I think the one thing though, is like, I actually like business. So to me, like spending time thinking about like the organizational structure and the organizational design and how you tie performance and reward, how you think about process and systems to prevent bureaucracy from like impeding the creative process. I love that stuff. So that was more interesting to me.
Did you said the Activision guys maybe had seller's remorse?
No,
one of
The Blizzard.
One Blizzard.
One of the Blizzard guys. Do you feel like you have that with Activision Blizzard now?
Not a bit.
Do you wish you didn't sell?
Absolutely not. I have zero regret.
You don't want to keep running it.
I wouldn't have sold it if I did. I'll tell you what happened. I got to a place where I was really worried about the industry. And this is what I started to see. And it happened a few times before, but there wasn't resolve. So like Disney, Warner, Paramount, all the entertainment companies came in, did badly, exited quickly. And they did it, like in Disney's case, like 4 or 5 times. We never had Chinese competitors. Like this was a whole new thing. And it's like, where did these guys come from? And like, look at the work ethic and the capability. And, Tencent, it's the biggest video game company in the world by a mile.
By a lot.
And they're in a market that we can't enter. It's like, you got to get a license to participate. You have to have a joint venture partner, or you have to license it to a local partner. They're going to copy the game and do something directly competitive.
You basically can't get to those billion customers.
By the way, they go to the office every day, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. They don't need a vegan meal in the cafeteria. It's like there's no like corruption in the culture. It's just work. And like people say, oh, China doesn't have creativity. They have immense creativity. It's incredible, like how creative the capabilities at Tencent Studios are. So now you have all of a sudden, like Tencent comes in the market. You have, Sony and Nintendo have always, had a commitment to the business, but they've also had the benefit of the hardware. Then all of a sudden you started to see like new entrants, Amazon, Apple, Meta, no profit incentive. It's like every one of them wants to make games and they don't care if they make any money doing it. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, we're this independent company with a $54 billion market value, and you're going to now be competing against all these companies that have no interest in making a profit.
And $2 trillion enterprise value.
I've seen the movie in Hollywood, and I watched every one of these Hollywood companies move to a subscription model on streaming and destroy all their value. And I thought, same thing's going to happen to us. Like, we got to, and I don't know what our solution, we were going to buy Time Warner. That was our solution was, you know what, we'll take all the Time Warner intellectual property, turn it into video games. We'll take all our IP, turn it into movies and television. And then, AT&T ended up buying it. And so we didn't get to do it. But you realize, like, you know what? Their business models are broken too. It'd be like 2 broken business models and no paying customers. And so,
did you have discussions with Bucas along the way? You get serious?
Yeah. Well, you know what happened? I couldn't really talk to Jeff because.
Who is that?
He was the CEO of Time Warner. He was a college roommate of mine.
And a great guy. And so.
He, like you, can pierce to the truth pretty quickly.
And the only CEO who actually had the balls to say, you know what? This whole industry is going to get devalued out of existence, and I better get out before this thing is worth nothing.
He also part of his writing on the wall is he didn't have a direct consumer relationship.
Yeah. And that was a big thing for him, but that's what we would bring.
Right.
And that's why the combined business was an interesting idea, but they had a deal with AT&T.
Right.
And the only reason that I raised the financing to buy it was I thought the deal wasn't going to go through because I thought the Justice Department was going to stop it.
Right.
Bucas was nervous about that. They thought it was a coin flip.
And we were ready to go, fully financed offer if AT&T didn't go through.
So you were worried about the competitive dynamics.
I still am.
Like you weren't there was reports, and again, like, you tell me if this is right or wrong, but this was 2023, 2022.
2020.
COVID-ish, right?
2021.
Peak social activism in the workplace. There was a petition, like 1,000 people signed it.
That was fake.
Everybody, the board, the independent auditors, everybody was like, this guy's done nothing wrong. We completely have his back.
No,
but
I can tell you exactly what happened. So the Communication Workers of America Union started looking at technology. They kept losing because they represented like the News Guild, Comcast, and they realized they're losing members at a really dramatic rate. So they got to figure out how do they get new union members. So they targeted a bunch of different businesses, Google, some other tech companies, Tesla and SpaceX, and us. And it's the power of unions. I didn't really understand this until we went through this process. They were able to get a government agency, the EEOC, and a state employment agency called the Department of Fair Employment and Housing to file fake lawsuits against companies like us and Riot Games, making allegations about workplace that they weren't true. But they were able to do this, and they're so clever. They realized that would be a thing that they then could come into a company because we pay well, we have great benefits, great working environment. Say there's a problem and then unionize. And they could say, hey, the culture is bad, like people are harassed or they're retaliated against or there's discrimination. And so it was like the guy and the lady who ran CWA, they are really smart. They're not there anymore because they got fired. But so they came up with this plan. They hired a PR firm and they started attacking our company. They got these two agencies to file these lawsuits that claim like there was some sexual harassment of the company. We didn't have any of that. And ultimately, they had to admit that it was not truthful and withdraw the complaints. But this is the way that they...
But they don't have any liability for doing it.
Because it's privilege.
And the damage is already done.
Well, it was the plan.
Right.
And
did you know that was did you recognize at the time that this was all happening, or only in hindsight?
I've seen it in another company. They knew in advance that a lot of the press was made up by union activists.
I didn't know any of it. And my general counsel came from Procter & Gamble. He was like we hired a lawyer from Skadden Arps 15 years ago to run our compliance department. And she's a killer. And like, I'm one of those people, I think it's probably from my like upbringing, but when I heard about like things that were inappropriate conduct in the workplace, I just fired people like on the spot. My view is like, you don't want to have a culture where there was any kind of like discrimination, retaliation, misconduct. Like you just don't, like it's bad for recruiting and it's bad for retention. And I mean, think about it. I dated Sheryl Sandberg. You think we had a problem with pay equity in gender pay at Activision? She literally wouldn't do a lean-in circle at the company until I showed her our pay equity filings. I swear. So like my general counsel said, yeah, we got these investigations, but like we don't have any issues. We're not worried about this. And he said, came to the board, said, yeah, we got the EEOC and the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, but we turned over all of our documentation. We don't have any issues here. This is not something to be concerned about.
So none of that had anything to do with you being like, you know what, forget this. Like, this is not worth it. Let's sell this.
And I come from the other point of view that I knew plenty of companies who got called by the U.S. Justice Department. Should we try to block this merger, or this acquisition
with
Microsoft?
Activision, Blizzard, Microsoft?
And I think from the other point of view, it's okay. Washington, D.C., do you want our kids to be playing games from a U.S. company or a Chinese company? So if you want it from a Chinese company, block the merger.
Yeah, but like you're a sophisticated person. So this is what happened. So like, I've never actually told this story, but I guess now I can. So Trump administration won, they banned TikTok. Stephen Mnuchin and I were friends since high school, and I called him and I said, what's going to happen? And he said, they're going to sell it. And I said, to whom? And he said, Microsoft is like really the only bidder. If you want to do something, you better do it quickly. So I called Doug Leone and I said, what's the deal? And he said, I'm going to send you a one-page sheet. This is what the terms are. They're not negotiable, and we got to get it done right away. And I said, would you rather have me? Would you rather have Microsoft? He said, call Yiming. I know the founder of ByteDance pretty well. He's a great guy. And he said, call Yiming and talk to him, see what he says. So I called Yiming and I said, would you rather have Microsoft or rather have me? He said, probably rather have you. And he said, I don't even know what's going to happen. He's like, this all just happened. And so I said, well, it may be tough to pull all this together. And I don't know that I'm going to have the resources to do what will need to be done. Like, we don't have top secret security clearances with the government. I don't know what the national security issues are going to be. Would you mind if I call Satya and just see if he'd want to do it with me? And he said, go ahead. So I called Satya and I said, I don't want to bid against you. Like, it'd be great if we were partners in this. And, I think we're more of a consumer company than you are. And I think I know a little bit more about social media than you do. And we should do this together. And he said, look, we're further ahead than you. I don't even know if this deal is going to get done. I don't need a partner in this one. And he said, but if the deal doesn't get done, we should sit down and talk about us buying Activision.
What year was that?
2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, can I?
Well, by the way, and you know that I wish that after that deal got done, that you'd have taken $1 billion of Microsoft money and made something good to help improve Microsoft's position with consumers around the world.
You want to laugh? It's so funny you say that, because they said, like, we don't really have a job for you at Microsoft. And I said, there's only one thing I would do. And they said, what's that? I said, I would want to run the hardware design team. I've always wanted to build a console. And I think I could put a team together that we'd make unbelievable hardware. And, they didn't want, they didn't, and they're right. Like, you don't want a really rich guy who, is...
It would have been interesting to have a disruptive thinker think about a new way to do a chipset.
Well, that's part of what I wanted to do.
And in the world of OpenAI and NVIDIA, imagine an LLM chipset, in a home console, because now it's the processing's a lot more valuable than memory.
No, but this is the thing. Like, you'll know better than almost anybody. The PlayStation 3 architecture was like way before its time. So PlayStation 3 had 8 processors, and 2 of the processors were actually the early architecture of AI core processors that weren't entirely dedicated to just AI, but they were the first of that design. And programming for the PlayStation 3 was very difficult because you needed a background in multi-thread architecture. It was very hard to find programmers who knew how to program for a multi-thread architecture device. And that was why the PlayStation 3 did not get software that took advantage of that hardware. They then re-architected it to PlayStation 5 and made it more sensible as an architecture, but there's no inspired hardware right now.
Oh no, they're trying to get out of it and put it all in the cloud, even though it's still the best way to instantiate a brand with consumers.
Well, how about this? This was one of the meetings we had. What's it called? The CMA, the UK regulator. Their whole, they were just doing the bidding of Lena Khan. They knew
It's a blocked Figma.
There was not really a competitive reason to not let this deal go. So they kept inventing things. So one of the things was the cloud computing, right? It's Microsoft has Azure, and they're going to have a competitive advantage in the cloud.
That seemed like a crazy give up to me, but I guess you had to do it.
Well, the funny thing was I had just gotten the new Samsung phone, and I had it in my bag. And they're saying you don't realize, but we know this is going to be the big future. And all the processing is going to be done in the cloud, and Microsoft's going to have this big advantage. I'm like, you guys know nothing about gaming. And I took out my new Samsung phone. I said, see this phone? The microprocessor is an octa-core processor. The graphics processing in it is better than the PlayStation 5. There's 8 processors in here that are all more powerful than anything in a game system. And I don't need to go to a cloud and waste the money and the expense and run the risk of latency and process in a cloud, which is a lot more expensive.
Spend 25 cents an hour for cloud.
It's on here. This has Wi-Fi 7. I could broadcast at below 20 milliseconds to any Samsung TV. This is better than any video game console. This is where games are played. So I don't know what you're talking about in the cloud. It's that's for storage. It's our games, our big games are 130 gigs. You may need some storage, but the phone is where the processing is going to take place. And they were what?
Just throw us a bone then.
So that's what
we
happened.
don't want to go back to
crazy.
school. Throw us a bone.
Yeah.
Bobby, before we wrap, the 2019 story around TikTok has an interesting through line, which is I was looking at a Polymarket poll. You know what Polymarket is?
I was there on the day of the election.
Okay, so Polymarket is, you know what Polymarket?
Make money?
I don't bet, but I
I saw the guy.
Did you see this?
Pincus had the guy at his class at Stanford, and I was there for it, part of the interview process.
So for those that don't know, Polymarket is an online. They set odds on things online, and you can gamble
with betting with no take rate.
You can gamble. Yes,
he's afraid to have a take rate because he might lose his audience.
And on Monday, I shit you not, what day is today? Thursday. On Monday, I see the Polymarket for who's buying TikTok. And number 1 is Microsoft. Number 2 is Elon. Number 3 is Larry Ellison. And then number 4 is Bobby Kotick. At
pretty reasonable odds. They had you at like 11% or something. I was like,
Yeah, you could short yourself.
Well, it's funny. I was in New York.
You wouldn't get in trouble with any regulatory agent for taking a side there.
I was in New York the day of the election, and could have gone anywhere to watch the election. I went to Polymarket.
that's awesome.
Wow.
And
Must have been a party.
no, they were only like,
No,
they're working their asses off.
Oh, yeah.
Their question is what happens tomorrow.
But the crazy thing was, there was not one time during the day where Trump was less than like 61 or 62%. And like, it was a certainty. And there was probably $3 billion of wagering on the outcome. Like, you knew from 10 o'clock in the morning that Trump was winning.
Yeah.
And not by a little margin.
Yeah, the predictive markets didn't update. There must have been one side that was still betting on hope rather than on odds.
There were people they got to actually, they were so worried about the Polymarket influencing the outcome of the vote that they were getting people to take the other side.
So are you still trying to buy TikTok?
I can't really talk about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
it depends.
The betting market has it at 10%. The betting market has it at 10%.
It depends when this is published.
Yeah, I can't talk about it right now.
Well,
That would be awesome. Just for whatever it's worth, that would be awesome.
But just to get back to the
I
other
kind of
thing,
think
it's like,
if not that, something. I'd like to see operating rather than just investing.
well, you know what I'm spending most of my time on is finding jobs for veterans. And
Wow.
I started this thing 12 years ago. The Microsoft folks are great about it. Like, they let me keep the 501c3, and they
That's a Call of Duty.
Yeah, and they gave us 5 years of some funding. Not a lot. I mean, most of it is coming from me, but you know, you look out there and you realize there's 200,000 able, capable, unemployed veterans in the U.S. And in a recession, the unemployment rate is going to be 3 times the national average. Think about that. You go, you serve your country, you come out of active duty, you're 3 times less likely to find a job than an ordinary citizen. How is that even possible?
Amazon has found, I've been proud of its recruiting of vets, and they turn out to be spectacular in fulfillment centers because they know how to operate with discipline, you know, against kind of minute by minute goals. And also they know how to treat other people with respect around them. So
Yeah, we had a lot of, obviously, at Activision, but, you know, and this started with something not related to Call of Duty, but we've, you know, started 12 years ago with Obama had his first national security advisor was a former Marine commandant named Jim Jones. Awesome guy. Played basketball, went to Georgetown, played basketball in the Hoyas. His dad was CEO of International Harvester. Guy is like one of the great guys. And I met him, and he became co-chair with me of this thing. And the guy's just fantastic. But we've now, I think we're probably close to 145,000 jobs.
Wow.
oh my God.
Wow.
And so I love doing that.
By the way, with those people, do you ever have to do extra help along the way to keep them emotionally whole, or does getting the job alone kind of normalize life for them?
So the way we're structured, it's a very small overhead. Every dollar goes to placement, and so we fund NGOs that actually do the work. And
it'll build a support system.
But then what they do, and you know, there's probably 25 of them, but they go into the HR departments of the companies and they help them to make sure they know how to do transitioning, development, make sure that, like, you know, the interview process doesn't somehow, you know, is not unfavorable to a vet who isn't really trained on how do you interview for a commercial opportunity. And the NGOs are incredible. And I'll tell you, so there's one
Probably
guy,
times as a CEO where you wish you had that kind of vet discipline schooling the rest of your employees.
well, we hired, like, my chief administrative officer was an Army Ranger. You know, we had a lot of people.
You brought in a lot of people from the outside of the industry.
I always did. And because we couldn't find people in the industry who, other than game designers and programmers, but even programmers, it was very, very hard to find really skilled programmers as the technology is getting so much more sophisticated. But so there's this one guy in the Southeast, and he started this thing called Hire Heroes USA. And I don't know how he did it, but in like the 3 years we were funding him, his cost per placement was lower than anybody else. The quality of the jobs was better, and the volume was incredible. And we were struggling in San Diego, which is a very big veterans population. We didn't have any NGOs that were doing a great job in San Diego. So I didn't know the guy, but I called him and I said, hey, I'm on the board of Coca-Cola. I come down to Atlanta. I'd love to see you sometime, but I have an idea for you. What if we gave you the money to open up in San Diego? And he said, yeah, I'm open to that. You want to understand like what your expectations were and whatnot. And I said, we looked at your 990s and you don't take a salary. And my guys tell me that you got 3 kids, you're married, you got to take a salary. And he said, we can talk about that too, but you don't have to worry. I got part-time employment. I make a perfectly fine living. If you're thinking about the money, instead of giving it to me, put it in the grant that you're going to give me to open San Diego. So I go down there with a check for $1 million for the guy. So it's 3 years of compensation. And he starts giving me a tough time. He's like, I told you I got a part-time job. I don't need the money. Put the money into the thing and we'll find more jobs with that money. And I'm like, I'm curious. What's the part-time job? And he goes like this. I'm the number 7 ultimate fighting champion in the world. And that's the guy.
You're kidding me. Wow.
So he's the guy who he built Hire Heroes USA. Guy's incredible.
What a story.
But these guys, you spend time with them.
He ought to get some kind of national recognition.
Well, he's well known now because he does UFC commentating.
I mean, like a presidential medal or something.
Should have gotten it.
I don't want to keep you for longer than we need to.
I told
this
these guys we were gonna.
This has been amazing. We're gonna put the TikTok thing to bed. But would you work with Bing? If it ever happened, would you bring Bing on? Could you guys maybe make a little?
I would. He knows I would have worked for him.
Could you guys make a little tag team?
But I got to tell you the one Kleiner thing that's an important Kleiner fact. My business got started in Floyd Kwame's guest house.
Wow.
So Floyd has a son named Mark.
Lives in Ohio now, right?
Yeah, Mark
Drive.
And my business partner I started the first company with shared a cube at Apple Computer France.
Wow.
And Mark became my good friend. And when I started
Floyd
the company,
was a hero at Apple before going to Kleiner.
Floyd was at Apple. And
when John Louis Gasset was at Apple.
Yeah, my college roommate was working for Jean Louis, and Mark was working for Jean Louis. And then when I started going back and forth working on software for the Apple II GS and the Apple IIc, which was the thing that was the breakthrough for us, I was living in Floyd's guest house. So Kleiner figures very significant. He was at Apple then, but he had then transitioned and threw me out of the guest house. I had to fight Esther Dyson to be able to get that guest.
You feel like you got juice in the tank to keep pushing? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Steve Jobs' first grandchild was born yesterday. Speaking of Apple. Wow. Speaking of history.
Yeah, it's funny, I don't know Lorene really well. I've met her a bunch, but I don't know her, but my Steve stories are those are legendary.
Amazing.
Especially Pixar. For me, Apple One, he was
my Steve story about Pixar. He was close with a best friend of ours. We were at their wedding up in Napa, and we're at the table with Steve. He goes, I don't know, I took over this movie company that wasn't doing very good, animation company called Pixar. He says, you have no idea how much easier the entertainment business is than the tech business. He says, this is going to be so easy. And he proceeded to make about 10 number ones in a row, all 90 Rotten Tomatoes rating. But at that point, he was just, this tech business you guys are in are hard. this business is so easy. I go, whoa. You go over to Pixar, I think it's not an easy business to run where everybody builds their own house for a cubicle, and you have 200 people, 200 expensive people building one thing every 2 years. But he came in and said, this is so much easier.
Yeah, well, we were making, I think it was Toy Story 2. And I hired a lot of people out of Procter & Gamble. And Procter, they had great business discipline. And if you could find the people who were entrepreneurial that didn't really fit into Procter,
Didn't stay too long.
They were the ones who had the good business process skills, not too much. Steve Case, a great example. Scott Cook at Intuit.
You didn't hire Scott Cook.
Well, he was like one of my early inspirations. He started Intuit when I started my first company. Wow. And in fact, the only real article there ever was about my first company was in Forbes, and there was an article on Intuit's founding at the same time.
Wow.
But we loved Procter people. So I hired this Procter guy.
I think he's still on the board, probably.
Of Procter? I think he is. And so we hired this guy, Dutch guy, loved video games, and he was choosing between Coke and us. And he ended up coming as our president. And we were going up to a Pixar meeting to talk about Toy Story 2. And we were going to show him the latest build. And so he comes in my office and he said, there's a lot of open business issues with Pixar. I'm like, there always are. We figure out how to resolve them, but there's always going to be open business issues with those guys because there's not a lot of business people at Pixar. And I said, make sure that the build looks good and works great. And I said, one thing you want to do is go a few hours earlier, set up the device. We can't have any technical problems. Steve comes to the meetings, John Lasseter comes to the meetings, no crash bugs.
5 second glitch, and Steve slams the door in your face.
Yeah, and so that's the most important thing for the meeting. Next day he comes back to my office with a printout. I don't even think it was PowerPoint in those days. I don't know what it was, but it was a printout of 50 pages of shit, business stuff and market research, and I don't even know what it was. And I was like, what is this? And he said, this is what, the materials we're going to use for the meeting. I'm like, no, Pixar meetings, we show the build and then we talk about it. That's what you do. And he said, when you hired me, you said you're the president, you get to run the day-to-day operations of the business. It's how I like to run things. And I want, I'm going to use a deck and a presentation so we stay organized through the meeting. I said, okay, you could have 5 pages and the headings have to be in Helvetica, 14 point, and the body copy needs to be Garmin condensed, 12 point. A third of the page needs to be a picture of the game, and you can have no more than 5 bullet points per slide and 5 slides. And the guy looks at me, he's like, wait, you're telling me how many pages I can have in a presentation? I said, and the fonts and the number of bullet points. And he's like, I'm not sure this is the right job for me. And I'm like, I'm telling you, Ron, you got to trust me on this. I've known the guy since 1983. He's coming to the meeting. I know how this works. All I want you to do is be successful. Please listen to me. And I'm not going to tell you anything else. Just please listen to me on this. We get in the van at Oakland Airport, and he gives out the deck, and it has 6 pages. And the last one is focus group results. And I said, what is this? And he said, we got focus group in yesterday. I did a focus group, and here's what the feedback was. I want to summarize the feedback. I said, why? He said, well, we thought it was important for them to know because there's some changes we're going to need to make. And, we want to show them that it's actually based on, real data. I'm like, take it out. And he looks at me and he goes, look, I've done everything you asked, I got it down to the 5 points. I agreed to the 5 bullet points. He's like, look, you got to give me some latitude. I said, as long as you will fully own the consequences of doing this, okay. I'm telling you, for your own best interest is not a good idea, but you're going to own the consequences. He goes, what do you mean by that? I said, if we get terminated, our license agreement, I'm terminating you for cause. So I just want you to know, like, that's what you're signing up for. And he's like, look, you know what? You know me, I'm an accountable person. If things don't work out, you can hold me accountable. I said, you got it. I said, hey, don't pass the things out until the end of the meeting. We walk in, we sit down, he passes the thing out. Steve takes the thing, gets to the last page, looks at me, goes, what the fuck is this? And I said, Ron? And he said, you know, we got some focus group results and some feedback, and we want to be able to make the changes, but we didn't want you to think it was just capricious. Like, we want you to know it's based on data. Steve goes, do you think Gone with the Wind came from a focus group? Do you think Chinatown or The Godfather came from a fucking focus group? He goes, do you think great entertainment comes from market research? You're in the entertainment business. That's not how you make great entertainment. And he looks at me and goes, where's that guy from? I said, Procter & Gamble. He looks at me and goes, get the fucking Procter & Gamble guy out of the room. To Ron's credit, he got up and he walked out and he waited. And Steve was like in one of these things.
But did he also resign?
Nope, I didn't want him to. He was great.
Yeah,
like,
that was more valuable. He learned a lesson.
Did the right thing, but you know what? Steve gave me like, you know, a hard time for 10 minutes. I was like, and John goes, can we look at the game? So, and we had a really good build. So we like put the build out, and Steve was still pissed off about everything, but we got through it. And it's one of those lessons though. It's like, it will stick with me for the rest of my life. Like, he's right. You know, it's like, I've never seen any market research things that we've ever done in video games that has been particularly useful. And we have all these people doing all this stuff. And now you can do a lot with data that's very different. But like from a purely creative perspective, that stuff was all a waste of time. And like,
the font recommendation, was that a font you'd heard from Steve that he liked, or is this your judgment about it?
No, I knew. Are you kidding? I had a fight with him for 45 minutes about whether or not you select the text and boldface it, or select boldface and then.
Steve?
Yeah, when we did our first software, when he showed me the prototype of the Macintosh, and he said, I want you to do this on the Apple IIgs and the Apple IIc, like, you know, I was absorbed in the culture of Apple.
Ill-fated Apple II.
So your first company,
my first company
in college,
made software for Apple.
And you met him then.
Yeah.
And he told
Floyd
you,
Kwame
and he
introduced
told you,
me.
no, the future of this business is.
Steve was much more reachable then.
Floyd Kwame set up the meeting. And then we made a mouse. There was a joystick company called Wicco. Remember them? Chicago joystick company. We made a mouse for the Apple II. We brought the mouse and our software, and we showed it to him. And he looks at the mouse. He's like, this is a piece of shit. And he threw it on the floor. And he goes, why would you do 2 buttons? It's like so complicated. And, you know, we were basing it a little bit on Xerox Palo Alto Research Center Star Workstation, which is what he based the Mac on. And
they had a system called Alto.
Yeah, and so we show him the prototype, and he pulls out this little blue bag, and he unzips it, and he pulls out the prototype of the Macintosh. I never, you know, it's like this is 1983, and he turns it on, and you know
big bag.
The hello comes up, and I would say to this day of like moments, other than when I saw the prototype of the Wii, there's not another moment where like I looked and thought the world is changing.
Wow.
Actually, first time I used ChatGPT, I think also goes in there, but it was like.
So 3 life-changing creative moments.
Did Nintendo show you the Wii?
Yeah.
When you saw the Wii, was it tennis? Is that what they showed you?
No, fishing.
Fishing?
Yeah.
And it blew your mind.
I was in Kyoto. Miyamoto was there.
Miyamoto always liked fishing.
Who's that?
He's the best game designer in the history of video games.
Okay.
He's a Nintendo guy, Mario and Zelda.
Okay.
So
he was basically a plush doll creator, animator, who started making video games that were
and then turned into the GOAT.
A fun way to play with the creatures you wanted to create.
Okay.
So we go, and it was, let me think about when that was. So it was, what year was the Wii? Well, whatever year it was
the early 2000s somewhere.
So we go, and I wasn't expecting that we were going to get to see a prototype of new hardware. I thought it was just our regular, like, annual get-together.
Which was always a new system with less processing power than anybody else, and a little bit cheaper than anybody else, and always some good games on it.
And I had developed a really good relationship with Iwata-san, who was the first out-of-family CEO that they ever had at Nintendo. And
there's a book about his wisdom, too.
Guy was, I loved the guy. I was crazy about him. And he was an incredible CEO. And so we go into this room, and there's like, it was probably, no, it was, I think it was a CRT. I don't even think it was an LED. And there was like a black thing that was sitting on a box. And they just said, Shig said, pick it up. And I go like this. And all of a sudden I feel the force feedback. And like, it didn't take any thinking. I just went like this. And there was a pond. There was just a pond on the screen.
Oh, wow.
And I go, and my lure drops into the pond and it splashes. And I start going like this and like this and like this, and you're feeling the force feedback. And then I got a fish, and I went like that. And I was like, this is going to change video games forever. And
that, by the way, was the first feature of using the Rumble pack in Zelda.
That's crazy.
yeah.
Can you guys acknowledge that the N64 is the best console? Can we agree on that, or can we not?
No, I think the Wii actually, well, depends on what you're talking about, what type of games.
Okay, there's 2 or 3 games that I still play today. Still have an N64.
My favorite console all time is the Genesis.
Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. And GoldenEye. Those 3 games.
GoldenEye is still the best gun game ever.
Those 3 games on Nintendo 64, I could literally play for the rest of my life.
Probably also defining.
Is that a really hot take?
How old you were when that?
Is that a crazy hot take?
No, but GoldenEye is what actually sold the N64.
Yeah, GoldenEye is the only game I've ever seen where people knew the names of guns the way car fanatics know the names of cars.
Right.
We made a sequel. And it was a challenging thing to make because I appreciate this too, but Barbara Broccoli did not really want anything that was violence. And she didn't really want guns in the game.
She owned the Bond
franchise.
She still does, doesn't
Yeah.
she?
Yeah.
She's the one that's not letting it. They can't make more Bonds right now. Isn't she holding it up? Anyway,
I read that, but what I'll tell you is she and her brother, like, they are great custodians for the IP.
yeah.
And I understood where she was coming from. She's like, if kids are going to play it, so I don't want guns. Can you do something other than guns? And I was like, no. Because the expectation is going to be the original GoldenEye. You got, like, that's what we have to do. And we struggled with being able to actually get something done that would be great. But I thought that making a GoldenEye sequel was a great idea.
What we heard was no fragging, you can't shoot anybody in the back, and there always had to be a big water scene at the beginning of the game. It's like, okay, well, we can put up the water scene, but you can't do an open world shooter where you can't shoot somebody from on 360 degrees.
No, it started with no shooting.
I never heard that. That's crazy.
Yeah, no, I went to the meeting. I was like, it's just not going to work.
All we're gonna drink is drink martinis.
And but those games for N64, absolutely. But I think like the thing that actually transformed the video game business the most was PlayStation 1.
The entry of Sony legitimized because there was a whole generation that had Trinitron TVs and believed now this is real. So that legitimized.
And it was a great architecture because it was the first, like 3D, but being able to do real-time 3D.
The emotion engine.
Yeah, and like that, there were some studies that I had heard about I haven't actually seen them, but I heard that over a 10-year period of time, they were studying kids' brains, and that spatially, kids really couldn't detect 3 dimensions until they were about 14 or 15 years old. But over the decade that the PlayStation existed, that kids had the ability spatially to perceive 3 dimensions at 9 and 10 years
Spatial
old
acuity.
because of video.
Thanks for better fighter pilots.
Wow.
Better robotic surgeons. And so, I mean, it's hard to say like what is your favorite, because it's really dependent on like what games were on what hardware devices.
And what time of life you were at the time.
Yep. Yep.
But what I do feel is like there's not good hardware innovation anymore. More of it's coming on this
Totally.
than it is on anything that's dedicated.
Totally.
And I would love to, like, I was hoping, Oculus or Vision Pro, like they would get to a place where it would actually be compelling. It's just not yet.
Not yet.
I think it's take a long time.
I thought Oculus was more of a software problem,
But
could
both.
be it.
I mean, if 25% of people put something on and they get nauseous in the first 15 minutes, it's not really a mass market product.
Yeah.
Unless it's alcohol.
Yeah, but you can't count on that for other than a third of the market.
Thank you for doing this.
I don't even know what I did.
I just appreciate you spending actually 2 hours with us. Just
So
really appreciate it.
23 years at Activision, what was the hardest year? The year that tested your spirit the most.
Getting the deal done was really hard.
Getting it done, and then you had to come into just a broken organization with a bunch of broken spirits.
Well, the union attack.
Getting the deal done with Microsoft.
Yeah.
Oh, getting that deal done. That was your hardest. Wow.
Yeah, that was like,
But it lasted a long time.
well, you know what happened? We didn't have a person that did government affairs or public policy. Like, it's not a thing for video games. So, we didn't have an office in Washington, and our view was like, Microsoft is great at this, but we negotiated a very big breakup fee because I was afraid maybe the deal wouldn't get done. But they have an awesome team, and
Probably the first time in 25 years you weren't in control of your own destiny.
like nothing, not at all, and it wasn't going well, and so I had to step in, and I have a lot of friends in government, but not like professional relationships, just by coincidence, I happen to have a lot of friends who are in government. And so we had to like rethink, how do you approach going to these governments and getting the approvals? And, we had to extend it for 90 days because the deal didn't get done.
The UK too.
And it was the UK that was the big problem. And so
It looked like the deals would get done without the UK.
it couldn't. No, they had too much business in the UK. And so I'd say that. And then even though all of the stuff was retracted and the state actually publicly acknowledged that we didn't have any workplace misconduct, that moment of time, like where, you're on Fortune's best places to work and most admired company list year after year after year. It's like the thing that I actually felt like was one of our greatest accomplishments was our workplace, like having a great culture that people loved working at. And like reading and seeing this misconception of the workplace that was, and like of almost anything that you could say about the company, like not having good compliance practices is the thing you could never say. And
Factually.
yeah, but it's like personally offensive to me. And so like that, just having been tagged with that, that was hard. And, but the time of like not being able to run the company and being fully focused on trying to get a deal done, I wasn't doing what I enjoyed
not the job
doing.
you signed up for. So another question I wanted to ask is, So I'm just such a fan of partnerships in business, and you and Brian have been at it forever. What's the secret to your guys' working relationship?
I think like we're philosophically aligned on almost everything. And I think we've always had this relationship where if one or the other of us felt really strongly about something, then we just defer to the other person. And we had very different roles. Like I was the day-to-day person and he's the chairman. And, but, I talk to him every day. And, it's when you can actually have your best friend as your business partner, it's a pretty remarkable thing.
And it worked. Bruce Springsteen once said, imagine having to work your whole life with your 4 best friends from high school. That's a problem with bands. And you started with somebody young and went through kind of a lot of success, some ups and downs. You guys seem, from the outside anyway, to be productively joined at the hip for a long period of time.
It's not from the outside, it's from the inside.
Awesome. And final question. So did you learn anything from Satya? If you become CEO of some big enterprise at scale again, you learn anything from him, rubbing up close to him that you might copy?
He is an incredible CEO. Incredible. And I would say the things that really, and I didn't know him very well, but he has incredible empathy, like wicked intellect, which you would expect, but, because Bill and Ballmer would never tolerate anybody that doesn't have just wicked intellect. But he gets right to the priorities. It's like the clarity with which he sees like what needs to get done is incredible. I mean, I just look at what he's done with AI. He realized that they were deficient in talent. He realized they were deficient in technology. And he just seized on Sam.
Bet big.
Really big.
Bet early.
In a structure that actually couldn't get easily attacked by government because he knew like he was going to be under the microscope. And then brings in Mustafa and made sure he had a backup bet. And, the only thing actually has surprised me is like one of the big opportunities I thought was going to come out of this was it's very hard to find talent in the video game business, and especially really good technical talent. And then if you look in like certain disciplines, AI, machine learning, data analytics, even harder. If you love games and you have that capability, we can get you. But if you want to solve big, complex AI and machine learning problems, we can't get you. Meta's going to get you. Google's going to get you. Now, like Perplexity and OpenAI are going to get you. But we're having a hard time. I thought we'd be able to tap into all these enterprise people.
Right.
And they had 200,000 amazingly talented people. And I thought, like, we'll get them because we're like the fun part of the business. We couldn't. We still can't figure out how to, it's not even a we. It's like, they don't seem like.
Microsoft Gaming, you're saying?
Well, like for Activision Blizzard within gaming at Microsoft, they haven't been able to tap into the talent pool.
It's kind of
any of it.
It's kind of a 20-year history of kind of empires within the company that don't cross over.
Yeah, because it's not business units. It's matrix, like they're product units. Like the whole business is this funky matrix. And I guess it works, obviously.
It's just not very resilient to change.
But also like, crossing the divide into gaming, like it's just not easy to do. And I was really worried that not just that the business model was going to get attacked, which that's obvious. And like that was the only disagreement. We got the deal done in 3 days. And the only disagreement we had over like the future of the operation of the business was Game Pass. And I said to them, like,
Game Pass is up one price for all subscription of otherwise $60 games
You're
or
saying an unlimited subscription from
from Microsoft.
Microsoft for any game.
yeah. And my view is like, we have a game called World of Warcraft that we have $15 a month. If you
For one game.
yeah, why would I
Right.
put that into a Game Pass?
Right.
You know, where it's like with Spotify, where suddenly you get 50 cents a month
Right.
And
it's for the best.
yeah, and I said to these guys, like, it's why trade out flexible business models where you can do what's actually in the best interest of the customer. You look at like Candy Crush, Candy Crush, we only monetize 2%
It's a flexible
of the
monetization
audience.
model.
And it's, when we added ads, we added another $400 million of operating income in 2 years. Like, why would you, and like,
And why would you give it all away for one price?
you wouldn't. And also, I really, I was so sold on, this is a funny thing with Iwata before he died. He used to say, what do you think about free-to-play game? And I was like, Iwata-san, free to start.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that. I think free-to-play mobile games now average about 25 cents an hour. So,
Yeah.
in World of Warcraft, last I heard, it was about 19 cents an hour. So,
Like 26. But, I didn't believe in that. But the beauty of your Microsoft is like, you can take that bet, and so far from what, I tried to, I look at what happened at Disney, and, when you do these things, you got Phil Spencer's a great guy. This is probably not a widely known story.
he's a Microsoft Games leader.
So I hired Phil to come run one of our business units.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And he calls me up and he said, they just offered me the head of Xbox. And I said, dude,
Take it.
you know what? I want you here and I would love to have you here, but that's your dream job. And so go do it. But I was ready to hire him to come probably be my successor. And so that was an easy part of doing this deal too. It was I knew the guy, I liked the guy, and I thought he'd be a good
Steward.
Really good steward for the business for the future. And so far what I've heard is they haven't really changed too much. And there's no corporate infrastructure anymore. So it's back to all studios. And people seem pretty happy. I mean, that's what I hear.
I'm a Microsoft fan since the 80s because of PC clones. Wintel was your friend if you were a gamer.
Yeah, well, I remember Satya's first day. I happened to be up there, and we had a half an hour together, and he said, what can you tell me about gaming? And I was like, dude, you shouldn't be in gaming. You're not a creative company. You should buy Workday or something, SAP. It's not a creative DNA company. And when he called to do the deal, I said the same thing to him, you need us because you're not going to figure out gaming with what you have, but is this really the priority? And he said, we really like this. And I can't tell you the other thing that I pitched him because it was confidential, but I had an idea that was a bigger idea, and he didn't want to go for that. But he liked this idea. And
$80 billion is still bite-sized.
it's not even consequential to the financials.
It's crazy.
I always figured anything under 5% of your enterprise value is kind of a whim and an experiment.
But you know what? I would have been okay with Meta. I would have been okay with Amazon. Any place where there's talent.
Right.
And I didn't think...
Talent and a platform.
Yeah.
It's nice to be connected to a platform.
And that goes without saying. But talent to me was something that was so important. And I also like founders. Satya, is unusual as a CEO because he has founder mentality. And that's a very hard thing to find in a professional
He also has
CEO.
teamwork mentality, which is pretty different from Microsoft.
Yeah, it is very different. That's unlocked a ton of value for them. But I didn't think Amazon could get a deal done with this government. I didn't think Meta could get a deal done. Apple's like, I knew that after Beats, they would never buy another thing. And so...
Yeah, Apple wants to pay monopoly pricing, which is they're the monopolist and you're not. No, I think Microsoft's a great home.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Excited to see what you do next. Really excited. Whatever that is.
Yeah,
Let me know when to show up for work.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us over.
We have dinner.
Yeah, great.
We set up a dinner. I don't
Amazing.
know what time you guys need to leave.
We have like at least 30, at least.
Okay.
At all?
Are you, maybe last question, I conclude all these the same. When you hear the word grit, Bobby, what do you think of?
To me, it's like the essence of what you want in every employee that you hire. It's the hardest thing to test for, but I can't tell you, I can't tell you the actual full story, but there's a guy named Clarence Avant who was he was the CEO of Motown Records.
Wow.
Amazingly capable executive. And I was hiring somebody that had worked for him. And I called him and I said, what do I need to know about this guy? Like he knew he was leaving and he told me, too much Harvard, not enough Harlem. And like that stuck with me since like the 1990s, but like
that person didn't get hired.
I hired him anyway,
It worked?
and it did not work out.
Wow.
And it was exactly that, and I didn't really pay. Like, every time you get the regret of hiring somebody, it's usually like you had the warning sign up front. But like it's the hardest thing to find, and it's the hardest thing to test for is judgment and grit.
Thank you. Thank you both.